It was a crime so brutal that many people compared it to the infamous Manson family attacks of the previous year. In 1970, the vicious slaying of two young Ohio college students, 20-year-old Mary Petrie and 22-year-old Bill Sproat, shocked the Midwest. This is a haunting true story of love and loss, a devoted couple whose lives were cut short in a single night of unimaginable violence, and a mystery that has endured for over 5 decades. What follows is the tale of Mary and Bill's promising lives, the night of horror that ended them, and the long quest for justice that continues to this day. Mary Petrie and Bill Sproat were, by all accounts, gentle and studious individuals with bright futures. Both shared a deep love of the French language and culture. In fact, it was this shared passion that brought them together. They first met through a mutual friend and quickly bonded over their interest in French studies. Bill was in his first year of graduate school at Ohio State University, having earned his undergraduate degree in French from Xavier University. Mary was a third-year French major at the College of Mount St. Joseph in Cincinnati. Despite over 100 miles between their campuses, the two maintained a close relationship, visiting each other whenever possible. Those who knew them described Mary and Bill as introverted but fun-loving and conscientious students, utterly devoted to each other. Mary, originally from the small town of Portsmouth, Ohio, had an identical twin sister, Martha. The twins were extremely close, the kind of sisters who could pull pranks by swapping identities at family gatherings. Mary was known for her warmth and academic drive, and she dreamed of becoming a teacher. Bill, likewise, was admired for his gentle nature and academic talent. He had even spent time studying abroad in France on a prestigious scholarship, an experience Mary hoped to follow in his footsteps one day. By early 1970, Mary and Bill had been dating for just over a year. They maintained a long-distance relationship, relying on letters and occasional phone calls during the week, and cherishing the weekends they could spend in the same city. In late February 1970, with winter still lingering over Ohio, the couple planned to reunite in Columbus for a quiet weekend together. On Friday, February 27th, 1970, Mary jumped at an opportunity for a last-minute ride to Columbus so she could visit Bill. She was determined to see him, reportedly insisting that even if she arrived late, she would wait in a hotel lobby for Bill to pick her up if necessary. Ultimately, Mary made it to Columbus that evening. A cab driver dropped her off at Bill's off-campus apartment on West 8th Avenue, just south of Ohio State's campus, where Bill was eagerly awaiting her arrival. That weekend was meant to be a relaxing escape from their studies, but unfortunately, it would quickly turn into a scene of unfathomable horror. Bill lived in a modest apartment which he shared with a roommate. With Mary in town, the roommate decided to give the couple privacy. He went out for the evening with friends on that Friday night, leaving Mary and Bill alone in the apartment. For Mary and Bill, it was a chance to enjoy each other's company, to talk, laugh, and perhaps a little more, all while being away from the pressures of school. Unfortunately, this brief haven of peace was about to be shattered. Sometime between 7 o'clock and 10 o'clock that night, an unknown assailant entered the apartment and brutally attacked the young couple. What started as an ordinary Friday night for two college sweethearts had become a manifestation of pure evil visited upon them by a truly disturbed individual. The following morning, Saturday, February 28th, 1970, Bill's roommate returned home after his night out, only to stumble upon a nightmare. He found the apartment door unlocked and the radio playing softly in the background. Stepping inside, he was met with a grisly scene of blood and violence. In the living room lay the lifeless bodies of his friend Bill Sproat and Mary Petrie. Shocked and horrified, The roommate immediately called the police for help. Columbus police officers arrived quickly, and what they saw inside the apartment was unlike anything they had ever encountered. The crime was extraordinarily savage. Bill Sproat had been stabbed over 20 times. His wrists were bound to his ankles with metal wire hangers, and a gag had been shoved into his mouth. Mary Petrie had suffered a similarly vicious fate. She had been stabbed more than a dozen times, and her skull had been crushed with a bowling ball found at the scene. The evidence indicated that Mary had also been subject to an indecent assault before she was slain. Blood spattered the walls, and bloody fingerprints were left throughout the apartment, suggesting the perp moved around freely after the attack. Seasoned detectives were shaken by the brutality inflicted on the young couple, with those involved later stating that it haunted them for the rest of their lives. News of the attack spread fast and sent waves of fear through the community and campus. The public was horrified that such a crime could happen in Columbus, and pressure mounted on the police to catch the perpetrator quickly. Investigators from the Columbus Police Department launched an intensive investigation, swarming the crime scene for evidence and knocking on doors all over the neighborhood. In the early phase of the investigation, Columbus police threw all their resources at the case. Detectives conducted dozens of interviews, followed up on leads across the city, and collected physical evidence from the apartment. Crucially, they recovered those bloody fingerprints and also gathered biological evidence from the indecent assault, preserving it even though DNA technology did not exist at the time. Despite the flurry of activity, the investigation faced immediate challenges. There were no eyewitnesses to the crime, and the perpetrator had left the scene without leaving a clear identity. Still, the police began piecing together a timeline and persons of interest based on what little they had. Notably, though a forensic sketch was created based on a person in the area who some witnesses thought was acting suspicious, there's no evidence this man was involved in the crime. The first people scrutinized were those closest to the victims. Bill's roommate, the very person who found the bodies, was interrogated at length. He was deeply traumatized by the discovery, and after confirming his alibi for the time of the attack, detectives quickly ruled him out as a suspect. Mary's cab driver, being one of the last people to see her alive that night, was also investigated. He too was cleared of any involvement after police verified his account of that night, finding that he had just continued on with work as usual and couldn't have been the assailant. With the roommate and cab driver eliminated, investigators were left without an obvious suspect. Notably, there were no signs of forced entry into the apartment, and nothing of value appeared to be stolen. This suggested that Mary or Bill might have willingly let the man in, or perhaps the door was left unlocked and he slipped inside unnoticed. The nature of the crime, with such personal, furious violence, made detectives suspect that the attacker could have been someone the couple knew. They suspected that someone may have harbored a secret grudge. This would also potentially explain why there was no sign of a forced entry. Put another way, this may have been an extremely twisted plot with the veneer of a friendly visit. Yet, when police interviewed the couple's friends, classmates, and relatives, no clear motive or enemy surfaced. Everyone who knew Mary and Bill described them as polite, studious people who steered clear of trouble. They weren't involved with street pharmaceuticals, crime, or any controversial activities that might invite retaliation. Nor was there evidence of a jilted ex-lover or love triangle. In short, the usual angles investigators might pursue in such a case led nowhere. Investigators expanded their focus beyond the immediate circle. They canvassed the campus area, going door to door in the neighborhood on West 8th Avenue to ask if anyone had seen or heard anything unusual on the night of February 27th. Some neighbors did report hearing faint sounds of music, likely the radio that was left on, but nothing that alerted them to the violence next door. A few witnesses recalled seeing unfamiliar individuals in the area, but leads like these were thin and could not be substantiated. As weeks turned into months, the trail grew colder. By the summer of 1970, only 6 months after the attacks rocked the city, Columbus police publicly admitted that they had no strong leads and wouldn't be solving it in the near term. The case that had once dominated local headlines gradually faded from the front page. Active investigations slowed as the tips dried up, and eventually the horrific slayings of Mary Petrie and Bill Sproat joined the ranks of Columbus's unsolved crimes. For the next few decades, Mary and Bill's case languished without resolution. Periodically, a new detective would be assigned to review the old case file, but no breakthrough ever came. The evidence collected, fingerprints, blood samples, and preserved biological evidence, sat in storage, awaiting technology advanced enough to make use of it. In recent years, they found that DNA from an unknown individual was indeed present, and kept the samples secure for more comprehensive testing once technology allowed. The case's status changed from dormant to active once again, in the eyes of the Columbus Police Department's cold case unit. Over the years, numerous theories have swirled around who might have attacked Mary Petrie and Bill Sproat, but no suspect has ever been confirmed. One enduring question is whether the perpetrator was someone the victims knew or a stranger who chose them at random. The fact that there was no forced entry and that the attack occurred when the couple was alone suggests a degree of planning. Perhaps the perpetrator knew Mary would be visiting and waited for Bill's roommate to be away. Some investigators have speculated that the attacker could have been stalking the couple, aware of their routine. This gives rise to the theory that a peeping Tom in the area targeted Mary, attacking Bill first to eliminate any opposition. However, if he was this familiar with Mary's patterns, it doesn't explain why he attacked her at Bill's apartment. Though given the depraved nature of this predator, the rationale for doing so may have been incredibly dark, and I'll leave that up to you to contemplate. In the past few years, there has been a surge of new attention and new technology aimed at finally cracking this case. The most promising development in recent years is the application of advanced DNA analysis and genetic genealogy to the 1970 evidence. The Columbus Police Department meticulously preserved the forensic evidence from the scene. Modern forensic scientists have been able to extract more data from this biological evidence than anyone ever expected. Detectives confirmed that they have DNA believed to belong to the attacker, a genetic fingerprint that was simply impossible to decipher in 1970. As of the latest reports, Columbus investigators are actively pursuing leads generated by this new testing. It appears to be only a matter of time before the perpetrator in this case is shackled up, if he's still alive. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just quickly plugging my new merch store. Just click the link in the description below and check it out. Also, don't forget to check out the Lazy Chill True Crime podcast, wherever you get your pods. It's got a ton of my content from this channel, my true crime channel, as well as some bonus content you won't see or hear anywhere else. In the dense rainforests of Borneo, tales persist of a secretive striped predator lurking just out of sight. Locals speak in hushed tones of the harimau, a tiger said to stalk the jungles. This isn't some cryptozoological entity cobbled together in modern times, far from it. The harimau is the Borneo tiger, a creature which definitely once existed, and which the locals have great reverence for. Officially, tigers have never been documented in Borneo's modern history. The only wild tigers in Indonesia roam Sumatra today, with extinct subspecies formerly in Java and Bali. Yet on Borneo, Indigenous Dayak communities hold memories and rituals invoking a great striped cat, passing down legends that keep the mystery alive. Could a tiger truly prowl this island's dense jungles, or are the contemporary reports based upon long-held cultural memories? To understand the enigma, we first need to consider Borneo's place in Sundaland, the biogeographic grouping of Southeast Asian islands that were once connected. During the Ice Age, lowered sea levels linked Borneo, Java, Sumatra, and the Asian mainland into one landmass, allowing animals to disperse freely. Tigers did populate many parts of this realm. The Indonesian islands of Java and Bali had their own tigers until last century, and Sumatra still has a fragile tiger population today. Borneo, however, seems to be the puzzling exception. The island harbors other large mammals also found in Sumatra: elephants, orangutans, leopards, and rhinos, but no tigers. Clues from the deep past suggest that tigers were indeed part of Borneo's ancient ecosystem. In the mid-20th century, archaeologists excavating Naya Cave in Sarawak uncovered hundreds of thousands of animal bone fragments. Among them was a tiger's wrist bone from a young tiger. Modern dating later revealed this bone to be roughly 13,000 years old. More recent digs have yielded additional evidence. In 2021, scientists reported a partial tiger jaw from another cave, dated to about 22,000 years ago. These fossils confirm that the tiger prowled Bornean forests in the late Pleistocene. However, concrete evidence of any Bornean tiger beyond prehistoric times remains elusive. No tiger remains from the last few thousand years have been conclusively identified, and early European naturalists and explorers never documented live tigers on the island. This lack of historical record suggests that if tigers did linger into the time of human settlement, they disappeared by the time written history and scientific surveys began. Notably, this is somewhat complicated by the fact that the kingdoms and empires that dominated what is now Indonesia prior to the arrival of Europeans were primarily maritime empires. They all knew about tigers and employed tiger imagery, though it's unclear if these were Borneo tigers. The cause of their disappearance is unknown, but what's clear is that by the modern era, tigers were officially absent from Borneo's fauna. Despite the biological blank space, the indigenous peoples of Borneo have rich oral histories and cultural practices involving tigers. Among Dayak communities, the tiger holds a prominent place in folklore, spirituality, and even language. The word for this specific tiger exists in numerous local dialects, such as Haramang in Dayak, and traditional belief systems include Borneo tiger-associated myths. And just to drive the point home, the word Haramang is different from the generalized word for tiger. There's also talk of a creature called Remaung, which is essentially a tiger spirit. Elders would say it was a kind of were-tiger, a spiritual being taking the form of a great cat, which made sense in ancient times when tigers were believed to roam the land. Physical tokens deriving from quote-unquote tiger loot drops are also woven into Dayak traditions. Heirloom artifacts, passed down through generations, sometimes include tiger parts. In one account, a Dayak leader proudly displayed an heirloom sword, decorated with what he asserted were tiger fangs. According to this account, these were orange drops from beasts slain by his ancestors in the Borneo jungles. Over the years, a few other tantalizing claims have surfaced to suggest the Borneo tiger might not be entirely myth. One famous account comes from 1975, when a Belgian adventurer led an expedition into East Kalimantan. The adventurer later claimed he encountered a tiger in the Bornean jungle and even managed to snap 2 photographs as evidence. The grainy photos, when published, appeared to show a tiger according to secondary accounts. And I say secondary accounts here because it doesn't appear that these photographs have ever been published online. That said, all sources agree that this was indeed a tiger, though it was questionable whether the photograph was actually taken in Borneo. From the scientific perspective, the consensus is clear. There is no hard evidence that any tigers live in Borneo today. No skins, no verified tracks, no droppings, no roadkill, no genetic traces, nothing. Biologists claim that if a breeding population of tigers had survived into the present, some tangible sign would likely have turned up by now. The skeptics argue that what locals call a tiger is likely a case of mistaken identity or memory, perhaps conflating the clouded leopard with a true tiger. Notably, these Dayak people have come to view this claim as quite offensive, since their indigenous religious and cultural traditions very clearly refer to tigers. As evidence for this, they and their supporters point out that the clouded leopard also has a role in their traditions, and this role is clearly separate from that of the Borneo tiger. They also casually observe that clouded leopards are relatively small, cute animals with spots, not large, ferocious, striped animals. They further assert that they and their ancestors are and were indeed able to tell the difference between a stripe and a spot. Notably, biologists also puzzle over why Borneo lacks tigers if they once had them. Habitat alone doesn't explain it, as Borneo's dense jungles and ample prey resemble Sumatra's, which supports tigers, and they were all part of one land mass. One hypothesis is that early human hunters or habitat changes thousands of years ago eliminated Borneo's tigers. Yet, intriguingly, some very legitimate researchers urge that we keep an open mind to local knowledge. They point out that Western scientists historically overlooked indigenous reports at times, and sometimes to their detriment. Given the elusive nature of tigers, and given that a small population may be viable, some experts believe that this tiger may be more reality than myth. It was supposed to be an enjoyable mother-daughter hike in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, but little did they know it was going to turn dark. On September 25, 2018, 53-year-old Susan Clements set out on a scenic trail with her daughter near Clingman's Dome, the highest point in the park. They anticipated a routine afternoon adventure amid the early autumn beauty of the Smokies. Instead, by nightfall, Susan had vanished into the misty mountains, sparking a massive week-long search and a baffling mystery that continues to haunt those who remember the case. Susan Clements was a mother of 3 from the Cincinnati area. She was on vacation in the Smokies with her youngest daughter, eager to share the wonders of the national park. An active, outdoors-loving person, Susan was no novice hiker. In fact, earlier that week, she and her daughter had tackled some of the park's more challenging trails, including one with steep elevation changes. On this fateful Tuesday, their plan was relatively simple. Take the Forney Ridge Trail to a scenic spot called Andrews Bald, and then return to the Clingman's Dome parking area before dusk. The hike is a few miles round trip, a pleasant day hike, not something that would normally pose a serious risk for someone like Susan. They packed light, carrying no heavy gear or overnight supplies, since they fully intended to be back by evening. That afternoon, the two set out from the trailhead in good spirits. They reached Andrews Bald and began the return leg of their hike in the late afternoon. As they neared the end of the trail, close to Clingman's Dome, Susan's 20-year-old daughter decided to go on ahead. She was a faster hiker and wanted to climb the short, steep path up to the Clingman's Dome observation tower for one more panoramic view. The plan was straightforward. They would split up briefly and meet back at the parking lot. It was around 5 p.m. when Susan's daughter hurried ahead up the path, and Susan continued at her own pace toward the parking area. Neither of them realized that this small separation would soon become a life-altering decision. When the daughter returned to the parking lot after her quick detour to the observation tower, she expected to find her mother there, or at least see her coming down the trail. But Susan was nowhere to be found. At first, the daughter wasn't alarmed. Perhaps her mom was just a few minutes behind, or had paused along the trail to catch her breath. The weather had been growing dreary. A light fog was creeping in, and daylight was starting to fade. She waited, scanning the thinning crowds of visitors for any sign of Susan. As the minutes ticked by, an uneasy feeling set in, and by around 6 p.m., with dusk approaching and still no sign of her mother, that unease turned to panic. Desperate to find Susan, her daughter decided to retrace their steps down the Forney Ridge Trail. She headed back into the woods, calling out for her mom and hurrying to the spot where they had last been together. The trail was growing dim and quiet, enveloped by foggy clouds that often shroud Clingman's Dome in the evenings. There was no trace of Susan on the path, and no answers to her daughter's shouts except the muffled sounds of the forest. Fearing that something was very wrong, Susan's daughter rushed back and alerted park authorities that her mother was missing. It was now night in the mountains, temperatures were dropping, and a light rain had begun to fall over the area. Thus began one of the most extensive search operations in Great Smoky Mountains National Park's history. Park rangers immediately organized search teams despite the challenging conditions. Clingman's Dome sits at around 6,600 feet, and that night the mountain was cloaked in darkness and dense cloud cover. Visibility was near zero in some spots. Any hope of quickly finding Susan that first night was hindered by the foggy, rainy weather and the rugged terrain. The few hikers and tourists still in the vicinity were questioned, but none had seen the missing woman. The searchers faced a long, anxious night on the mountain, and they knew the odds of locating a lost hiker in those conditions were slim until daylight. By first light on September 26th, the search effort exploded in size. The National Park Service called in resources from far and wide. Eventually, around 175 trained personnel from numerous agencies and rescue organizations across multiple states joined the mission to find Susan Clements. They set up a command post at Clingman's Dome parking area, which was closed off to the public so search crews could work unimpeded. Teams of rangers, volunteer ground searchers, canine units, and personnel with helicopters and drones spread out over the area. In the initial days, searchers hiked an estimated 500 miles of trails, repeatedly sweeping the routes around Clingman's Dome. When those yielded no sign of Susan, they turned to bushwhacking in a desperate final attempt to locate any sign of her. The terrain was unforgiving. The Smokies are notorious for dense undergrowth. Over the next several days, the park was drenched with up to 3 inches of rain, and the park became unseasonably cold, factors which hindered the bushwhacking operation. Then, on the afternoon of October 2nd, 2018, 7 days after Susan disappeared, the search came to a tragic end. In a tangle of thick vegetation by a cold, trickling creek, about 2 miles west of the parking area, the body of Susan Clements was found. She was lying on her back in the creek bed, amid the rocks and rhododendrons. The location was in extremely rugged terrain, roughly 3/4 of a mile off the Appalachian Trail. To put this in perspective, it was so inaccessible that a Black Hawk helicopter had to be brought in to airlift her remains out of the area. In the following weeks, investigators worked to piece together what had happened during the time Susan was missing. In April 2019, the Swain County Medical Examiner's Office in North Carolina released the official autopsy report. Susan had died of, quote, complications of hypothermia due to exposure to adverse environmental conditions, with dehydration listed as a contributing factor. The autopsy noted a striking detail. Susan had exhibited signs of paradoxical undressing. She had removed articles of clothing despite the cold, a common late-stage symptom of hypothermia-induced confusion. Apart from scratches and minor abrasions, her body showed no significant injuries and absolutely no evidence of foul play. There were no indications of an attack by animals or other people. Her death was officially ruled accidental. But even with these apparent answers, a haunting question lingered. How did an experienced hiker get so lost in such a short span of time in an area that, earlier in the day, had been filled with visitors? One theory is that it was simply a tragic navigational mistake. Perhaps as Susan continued toward the parking area, she missed a critical intersection. Not far from the Klingman's Dome parking lot, the Forney Ridge Trail meets another path, which leads to the Appalachian Trail and the Dome parking area. It's possible that in the fog, Susan walked right past the trail that led to the parking lot. If she mistakenly continued straight, she would have found herself on the Appalachian Trail, heading away from Klingman's Dome. In the low visibility and rain, she may not have realized the error until she was well beyond the intended turn. If Susan indeed took a wrong turn and unknowingly ventured onto the Appalachian Trail, she may have continued for some time, expecting to find the parking area around each bend. At some point, she likely understood that she was not on the right path. In that panicked state, with night falling, Susan could have attempted to find her own way out. This leads to another aspect of lost hiker behavior that is well known and documented, but isn't fully understood from a psychological standpoint. Often, disoriented hikers will head downhill or toward water in hopes of finding a road or help. The logic is generally believed to be that finding a stream downhill might lead to a path to civilization. Susan's final location suggests she may have done exactly this. Once off the established trail and moving downhill through the trackless forest, she would have been in very perilous terrain. Thick vegetation can look impenetrable at eye level, and steep slopes in the Smokies are slick and strewn with roots and rocks. It's easy to get injured or exhausted in such conditions, a fact which is doubly true with night falling. Another possible theory involves a physical injury or medical emergency. The idea here is that she may have tripped and suffered a minor concussion, which disoriented her. The subsequent investigation didn't report finding significant head trauma. However, a very mild concussion would be both invisible and also potentially enough to make her act out of character, even if only for a brief period. During this brief time, it's speculated that she may have gone off the trail and then become further disoriented, leading to her tragic end. Many have speculated that there may have been an element of foul play involved in driving Susan off the trail. While Susan clearly didn't perish directly to foul play, this theory doesn't claim that, and it actually might even be more terrifying. Rather, the thought is that someone may have simply menaced her off the trail, forcing her to flee into the dense woodland. Once she was off the trail, the perpetrator could have stalked her to force her deeper into the woods, before ultimately leaving her to perish. This theory is speculative, but has gained traction amongst those who have noticed a pattern of disturbing activities in national parks.